Welcome back to Masterminds and Wisdom. We're doing a deep dive today.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, into Li Lu and his book,
I love Lilu.
Civilization, Modernization, Value Investing, and China.
Big title.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's not just about investing, though. It's this whole journey through history.
Right.
I'm really curious to see where it takes us.
Well, you're in for a ride. Lilu is not just any investor.
Right.
He's known as Charlie Munger's protege.
Yeah.
And has this incredible life story.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine escaping from China during the Tiananmen Square protests
Wow.
and then building this wildly successful investment career in the U.S. Talk about resilience.
Yeah, okay, that's fascinating. I knew he was mentored by Munger.
Mm-hmm.
But escaping Tiananmen Square, that's a whole other level of intensity. I can already see how those kinds of experiences would shape someone's worldview.
Absolutely. And you see it reflected throughout the book, this deep understanding of history, human nature, and the importance of taking the long view. It's classic Munger.
So how does this book, which seems to cover everything from prehistoric humans to modern economics, connect to his investment strategy?
That's what makes it so unique. Li Lu argues that understanding history, especially the rise and fall of civilizations, is key to making smart investment decisions.
Okay.
He's not just looking at short-term market fluctuation.
Right.
He's trying to identify those underlying trends that'll shape the world decades from now.
Okay, let's unpack that. What kind of historical trends are we talking about?
Well, he borrows this concept called the Social Development Index
Okay.
from a scholar named Ian Morris.
Okay.
And it measures civilizations based on 4 factors:
Okay.
energy capture, social organization, information technology, and war-making capacity.
Whoa, that's a lot to consider. Give me an example of how that works.
Sure. Let's take energy capture.
Okay.
Imagine a society where the average person can only get enough food and fuel for basic survival.
Right.
Versus a society that can harness energy on a massive scale to power industries and technology. That difference in energy capture tells you a lot about their potential for growth and development.
That makes sense. And he uses this index to analyze civilizations throughout history.
Exactly. He charts a 16,000-year journey of the East and West,
Wow.
showing how these factors have influenced the rise and fall of empires. And get this, he argues that humans first flourished not because of farming, but because we were so good at outcompeting other species
Oh.
as we migrated out of Africa.
So survival of the fittest on like a global scale? That's a pretty humbling perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What about agriculture? Wasn't that a major turning point?
It was, but Little points out that agricultural societies eventually hit a ceiling.
Okay.
They're limited by land, sunlight, and other natural resources. That's why you see all these boom and bust cycles with those civilizations.
That makes sense.
Right.
But, one thing I find interesting is that for much of history leading up to around 1800, China was actually more advanced than the West in many ways.
Yeah.
It had sophisticated technology, complex social structure.
Right.
So why didn't they lead the charge into the modern world?
That's the million-dollar question. And Li Lu offers some fascinating insights. He even compares a Chinese scholar named Shen Ku to Leonardo da Vinci.
Hold on, a Chinese Da Vinci.
Yeah.
Who was this guy? What did he invent?
Well, imagine a polymath 500 years before Europe's Renaissance.
Okay.
Shen Ku was an astronomer who mapped the stars, an engineer who designed canals and dams, a mathematician, and even a government official.
Wow.
I mean, he basically embodies that intellectual curiosity and innovation that was present in China at the time.
Wow. I've never even heard of him.
Right.
So why didn't China, with all this potential, become the birthplace of modern science and industry?
Well, Li Lu argues that a few things played a role. Confucianism, while influential, became increasingly rigid in its thinking. And that stifled the kind of freewheeling intellectual exploration that fueled the scientific revolution in Europe.
Yeah. So more closed-off intellectual environment.
Yeah.
I can see how that would hinder progress. What else?
There's also this fascinating story of Zheng. His voyages in the 15th century. China had these massive fleets that could have easily discovered the Americas long before Columbus.
Wait, they could have beaten Columbus to the punch. What happened?
Right. But instead of continuing these explorations and expanding their influence, the Ming Dynasty decided to turn inward.
Oh, wow.
Focus on internal stability and control. This decision to abandon exploration is like a perfect example of how China's strong centralized government might have actually hindered the development of modern capitalism.
That's a bold statement. But it makes you think. A government that prioritizes stability and control might not be the best environment for the kind of risk-taking and disruptive innovation that drives capitalism.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway from Li Lu's analysis.
Okay.
He suggests that free markets need a certain degree of chaos and individual freedom to thrive, something that historically strong centralized governments haven't been comfortable with.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
From escaping Tiananmen Square to Chinese Da Vinci's and the limits of agricultural societies.
Yeah.
This is shaping up to be one mind-blowing deep dive. It is.
Where do we go from here?
Well, now that we understand Li Lu's historical framework, we can start to explore his predictions about China's future and what that means for you as an investor and global citizen in the 21st century.
Okay.
Buckle up, because things are about to get really interesting.
I'm ready. Let's dive in.
So we've seen how Li Lu connects China's past to its present, but what about the future?
Yeah.
Despite missing that first wave of modernity, he's surprisingly optimistic about China's potential to catch up.
Okay.
But it won't be easy.
He doesn't see it as a permanent disadvantage.
No, not at all.
What needs to happen for China to fully embrace modernity, in his view?
He outlines a few key things.
Okay.
First, a shift from a government-led economy to a fully free market system.
Okay.
Remember, he sees those early centralized governments as a barrier to the risk-taking that fuels real innovation.
Yeah, that's a pretty massive shift.
It is.
It makes you wonder how a country with such a strong history of central control makes that leap. Exactly. And it gets even more complex. Li Lu also believes China needs to move away from being the world's factory
Right.
and focus more on internal demand.
Okay.
Imagine a China where its own citizens are the primary consumers driving the economy.
So becoming less reliant on exports and more about creating a thriving internal market, that's a huge economic and cultural shift.
It is.
Is there anything else he sees as essential
Yeah, there is.
for China's future success?
He talks about the need for a cultural revival, but not just going back to the past.
Okay.
He envisions this modern Chinese Enlightenment that embraces rational scientific thinking
Right.
alongside their rich cultural heritage.
Combining the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
It makes me think about how he blends his own experiences. Like he's deeply rooted in Chinese culture, but also thriving in the U.S., which values individual initiative and free markets.
It's like his life is a microcosm of the path he envisions for China,
Right.
bridging those two worlds.
Finding a balance. Now, all this sounds like a long game. Are we talking decades for these changes to play out?
Absolutely. These aren't quick fixes. Li Lu's a long-term thinker. That's one of the big takeaways for your listeners.
Okay, patience got it. But if these predictions are right, what kind of impact could we see? Paint a picture for me. What does a future with a rebalanced China look like?
If Li Lu's right, we're talking huge shifts in the global economy. Think about it. China's already a major player.
Right.
But imagine them operating with a fully unleashed free market and millions of citizens with increasing purchasing power.
Okay, that's a lot to wrap my head around. What does that mean for, say, someone who's not an investor, but just trying to understand the world? What should they be paying attention to?
It means opportunities for sure, but also potential challenges.
Right.
Businesses need to be ready for a new kind of competition.
Right.
And on a geopolitical level, well, a more economically powerful China could reshape global alliances and priorities in ways we can only begin to imagine.
So Li Lu's giving us this framework for understanding not just China, but the entire 21st century landscape. Fascinating, but I gotta admit, it's also a bit daunting.
I hear you. But that's what makes Li Lu's perspective so valuable. He's not just saying, here's what's going to happen.
Right.
He's giving you the tools to think critically about these complex issues and make your own informed decisions.
You mentioned investing earlier. Let's talk about that for a bit. How does Li Lu approach investing, given all this historical and geopolitical analysis he's doing?
That's what I find so fascinating about him.
Yeah.
His investment philosophy is deeply rooted in this understanding of history and human nature.
Okay.
He's looking for those long-term trends that are going to shape the future,
Right.
not just chasing short-term profits.
So less about trying to time the market and more about understanding the underlying forces at play.
Precisely. And it's clear he's learned a lot from Charlie Munger. They both have this incredible patience and are willing to wait for the right opportunities to emerge. They don't follow the herd. They look for those hidden gems that others might overlook.
So what does that look like in practice? Can you give me an example of a company or industry that Li Lu might be interested in?
Sure. Think about companies that are poised to benefit from a rising Chinese middle class.
Okay.
Or those developing technologies that address global challenges like climate change or resource scarcity. He's looking for companies creating real value,
Right.
making a positive impact, not just generating quick returns.
I see. So his investments are almost an extension of his worldview.
Mm.
He's not just seeking profit, he's trying to shape the future he envisions in his book.
That's a great way to put it, and that's something to think about for yourself. How
Yeah.
can you align your own investments, your career choices, even your daily decisions with the kind of future you want to see?
Okay, that's a powerful thought. But it also raises a question for me. We've talked about Li Lu's emphasis on economic freedom, free markets, all that.
Yeah.
But what about personal freedoms? Where does that fit into his vision of the future?
That's where things get really interesting and a little bit uncertain.
It's like we've got this picture of China potentially becoming this economic powerhouse,
Right.
but it all hinges on embracing free markets.
Yeah.
And that makes me wonder, what Li Lu thinks about personal freedoms.
Right.
Because those don't always go hand in hand with strong centralized governments.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something Lilu doesn't shy away from.
Okay.
He argues that true economic freedom actually requires a certain degree of personal freedom as well.
Mhm.
It's like he's saying you can't have one without the other.
That makes sense. I mean, if you want people to be innovative and take risks,
Right.
they need to feel like they have the space to think for themselves, to express their ideas without fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because if you look at China's history and its current political system,
Right.
it's not exactly known for prioritizing individual liberties.
Right.
So the big question is, can China achieve this kind of economic transformation without also undergoing a significant political and social shift?
Wow. That's a pretty heavy question. It makes you realize that investing in China, or even just trying to understand its future,
Right.
isn't just about economic forecasts.
That's about values.
It's about grappling with these complex
Yeah.
social and political dynamics, too.
Absolutely.
For someone who's so focused on the long game on these massive historical trends,
Right.
Li Lu's also lived through some pretty intense personal experiences.
He has.
His escape from Tiananmen Square, the challenges of adapting to a new culture, building a successful career in a foreign country.
Mhm.
It makes you wonder how those experiences have shaped his worldview.
It's impossible to separate his personal journey from his intellectual one.
Right.
I think that's part of what makes him such a compelling figure.
Yeah.
He's not just an academic spouting theories from an ivory tower.
Right.
He's someone who's lived through history,
Yeah.
who understands the human cost of political upheaval and the power of resilience.
I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yeah.
It seems like one of the biggest takeaways from Li Lu's work is this idea that you can't just focus on one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
You have to understand the history, the economics, the culture, the
Yeah.
politics, human psychology.
Yeah.
It's all interconnected.
It is. It's all one big system.
So if someone listening to this deep dive wants to apply Li Lu's thinking to their own lives, where would you suggest they start?
I'd say start by embracing the power of lifelong learning.
Okay.
Lilu is constantly reading, researching, exploring new ideas and perspectives.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to challenge his own assumptions, and he's always looking for ways to expand his understanding of the world.
That's something we can all do, regardless of, background or profession.
Exactly.
We live in a world that's changing faster than ever before.
Right.
And the ability to learn, adapt, and connect the dots is more valuable than ever.
I agree.
And don't be afraid to question the status quo.
Yeah.
Challenge conventional wisdom and look for those contrarian viewpoints. That's where you often find the most interesting and insightful perspectives.
Often the most valuable.
It's like Li Lu is saying, don't just follow the herd, think for yourself.
Right.
Be willing to go against the grain if you believe in something.
Absolutely.
And remember patience.
Patience is key.
It takes time to develop a deep understanding of these complex issues,
Right.
to see those long-term trends unfolding. So be patient with yourself and with the process.
Yeah.
Li Lu's journey is proof that patience and a willingness to learn can lead to incredible things. His story is an inspiration, and his insights are invaluable for anyone who wants to navigate the complexities of the 21st century.
He's a true mastermind.
He is.
And I encourage everyone to dive into his work and explore his world.
Yeah.
You won't regret it.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the mind of Li Lu.
Great deep dive.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring his life, his philosophy, and his vision for the future.
It has. Thank you for guiding us through it.
Of course. And thank you for joining us.
And thank you to the listeners.
We'll see you next time on Masterminds in Wisdom.